Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Adventures in Virtual Reality. Story number 1. Good Tech. 29th of April, 2037. Sojourn Resort, Lake Tahoe, Nevada. Leslie Scott crouched at the starting gate, the long descending slope of the slalom course dropping away before her. She flexed her hands repeatedly on her ski poles as she waited for the countdown. The sound of the crowd around her diminished as they also awaited for the final Olympic qualifying race to begin. The pole of lights to her right front suddenly lit up with an accompanying chime. Then the red lights began to go out in sequence, starting at the top. She counted them as they winked off. 5, 4, 3, yellow, green. A loud buzzer sounded, and she shot out of the gate. Shoving off with her ski poles, she flew forward on her skis. She repeatedly dug her ski poles into the snow to build up her speed. She leaned into the first gate, barely missing the flag, and immediately cut off, angling toward the second gate. With perfect precision, she navigated her way past the third and fourth gates as well. But she turned a little wide while coming out of the fifth and saw in front of her two small mounds of snow, one immediately behind the other. She bent her knees to absorb the shock, but was too late and hit the first mogul too hard. Instead of using it to cut her momentum and turn her to the left, she hit the second mound head-on and took off like she'd hit a ramp. Skis no longer in contact with the ground, she was helpless to stop her trajectory. Extending her legs, she managed to barely touch the snow beneath her, but lost her balance and started to tumble in the air. Heading straight for the large tree on the edge of the course, she gasped, letting go of her ski poles, and the scene froze around her. Suspended in the air like a fly, trapped in amber, all motion and sound stopped. A pleasant, disembodied voice announced, "Simulation beyond programmed safety parameters. Reset will occur in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2... Damn it! Leslie screamed from her frozen pose in the air. Hippogriff X-ray! As soon as she shouted her key phrase, she found herself in a standing position wearing a standard VR sensory suit. The illusion of the skis and poles were gone, and she could once again feel the heavy helmet and electronic harness she was wearing. The scene faded slowly to black as a figure slowly appeared in front of her. A distinguished-looking gentleman in an immaculate gray suit appeared before her. With his hands folded politely in front of him, he smiled and inquired, "Yes, Miss Scott, how may I be of assistance?" She couldn't tell if the figure was the image of a real person or another simulation. He stood, calmly waiting for a reply, and she decided that he had to be an artificial character. No one could wear a suit like that so perfectly. There wasn't the slightest wrinkle in it. He looked too perfect and flawless in his manservant role. "Damn it!" she said again, wishing she had a real ski pole to throw. "Why does this damned computer keep stopping the program? This is the third time in the last 4 runs that it's done that. I'm not going to pay for any of this if it happens again." The butler-like figure apologized with the greatest patience. "I am sorry, Miss Scott, but we tried to warn you. You specifically stipulated, despite our recommendations, that you wanted the strictest possible adherence to actual physical laws for these simulations. I assure you that the program is working perfectly. Perhaps you would like to reconsider relaxing some of the physical constraints on the program? It's a very common practice, and it does make the simulation far easier to control. On the other hand, you could simply try one of the easier downhill scenarios if you insist on maintaining absolute reality limits." No! It has to be this run. This is the course that I won 3 years ago during the 2034 Olympic trials. The attendant remained motionless, waiting for instructions. Leslie bit her lip, weighing her alternatives. All right then, go ahead and relax some of the parameters. But if this program interrupts again, I'm not only going to withhold payment, I'm going to sue. Thank you, ma'am, the manservant said, and as he stepped back, he gestured in front of her. If you would be so kind, he said, leaving his request unfinished. Slowly, words appeared before her in bright gold letters suspended in the air. She sighed and read them aloud. I, Leslie Warren Scott, do hereby authorize Sojourn Enterprises to relax the physical parameters of this simulation and modify my original contracts and agreements accordingly. I waive all requirements for maximum reality modeling for this and subsequent simulations and will hold Sojourn Enterprises exempt from lack of realism that results. Thank you, Ms. Scott. The floating golden letters slowly faded away. When you are ready to proceed, please recite your access phrase to begin. The figure in gray faded from sight. Leslie breathed deeply and shouted, Hippogriff X-ray! Suddenly, Leslie Scott found herself once again standing at the starting gate. She dropped into a starting crouch again, her heart racing involuntarily. Glancing at her opponent to her left, she nervously flexed and relaxed her grip on her ski poles that she dug firmly into the snow in front of her. Once again, the pole of lights to her right front lit up with a loud chiming tone. Again, the red lights blinked off in sequence, and she silently counted once more. 5, 4, 3, 2, go! As the buzzer sounded, she pushed herself out of the gate with her poles. Digging her poles into the snow over and over again, she leaned forward, flying down the slope. As she cleared the first gate, she leaned back to catch the second, and successfully threaded her way through gates 3 and 4. As she came out of the 5th gate, she again saw the small but treacherous moguls of snow before her. Bending her knees too late, she hit the first mogul too hard and flew too high into the air, just like before. This time, however, as she rose into the air, she extended her foot and caught a ski on the snow beneath her. Miraculously digging her skis into the soft, powdery snow, she managed to turn, cutting to her left, sharply turning back toward the 6th gate. With snow spraying her face, she dug her poles into the snow and pushed against the icy terrain to regain her lost speed. Folding herself into a lower crouch to reduce her resistance to the wind, she tucked her poles under her arms and flew down the steeper slopes, skis barely touching the ground, as she accelerated ever faster down the course. The attendant monitoring the VR program nodded with satisfaction. He watched the 2 screens showing Ms. Scott's virtual reality program, one showing a first-person point of view, and the other showing readouts of her body telemetry. Her blood pressure was up, and her heart was racing. He read the screens like an expert reading a polygraph. She was totally absorbed in the simulation and was enjoying it completely. How are the others coming, Jerry? He asked the other attendant. Fine, Steve. No problems with any of them. Mrs. Jenkins over in VR Module 3 was overexerting herself a bit, but the program adjusted itself accordingly. Steve nodded. The only problems that they ever had with these simulators were with the people that insisted on absolute realism. Sojourn Enterprises was one of the few companies that actually kept its word when such stipulations were made. It had built its reputation on that realism. In this case, reducing gravity to 0.95 of normal and slowing down time by a mere 1.5% was sufficient for Ms. Scott to successfully complete the daunting slalom course she had selected. Glancing again at her program monitor, he hit a key to pull up her customer status page. He thought, not bad for a lady of 46 subjective years. He calculated in his head quickly. Let's see. If she'd been, say, 25 when she ran this course back in 37, Then she must have spent at least 18 subjective years in fast fields during the last 3 real-time years. That was a pretty heavy-duty cycle. Since the flow of time inside the fast fields was accelerated, she had aged more than a decade doing technical work of some sort inside one of those time field factories. Of course, in the 3 or so years she'd spent inside those facilities, she had also earned decades of exorbitantly high salaries. Now that she was out and back in real time, she was one of the newly rich, and she'd probably retire early. Now, with time and money to spare, she was spending her wages catching up on all the life she'd missed while in a fast field. Typical, he thought, burning themselves out in fast time to make a quick buck, and then spending it all trying to regain what they'd lost. At $1,000 an hour, this type of recreation wasn't cheap. Of course, the time field companies that operated the many fast field working facilities had anticipated this particular consequence of their fast field manufacturing. They had planned ahead and had created an entire chain of entertainment-related businesses. While the companies had to pay many years of salary to each individual for every year they spent inside their factories, they also collected most of the earnings back from these fast timers that they had earned while working there. The world's economic ecology had adapted itself to new rules of supply and demand. "How are the follow-up activities for our other guests coming along?" Steve asked Jerry. "Fine," said Jerry. "When this round of simulations is done, all the customers will go upstairs to the clubhouse restaurant and join the real skiers and other simulator patrons. There are a lot of rich bachelors here this weekend that are Miss Scott's age. I don't think she'll have any more problems with the rest of her stay here." Nodding, Steve walked down the rows of monitors, scanning the other simulations currently running on the resort's computers. Technology, he thought. What a wondrous thing. EVR tech was a blessing. It could make even the wildest fantasies become real. Using EVR, people could be young again and let people literally do impossible things. They could go anywhere and enjoy marvelous experiences. They could even find romance. Tech like this, he thought, really can make dreams come true. Story number 2, Bad Tech, 5th of May, 2037, Chicago, Illinois, North Side. Sergeant Wilcox held his assault rifle upright as he silently crept toward the door to the apartment. Signaling to the 3 team members following him down the hallway to hurry, he took up his position on the far side of the door. All the others were armed and wore standard-issue body armor and helmets. Harrison had the taser rifle. Jessup and Thomas were armed with the non-lethal scatterguns. As squad leader, he was the only one carrying a lethal high-velocity automatic rifle. When the others were in position, he gestured and signaled a silent 3 count to his companies. On 0, Patrolman Jessup smashed through the door and threw himself to the ground in a firing position. The others tore into the room behind Jessup. Wilcox landed on the ground and rolled, ending up in a firing position on one knee. Harrison fired his taser rifle twice, taking down those who'd been surprised by the sudden invasion of their apartment. Noting that everyone in the first room was stunned or paralyzed with fear, Wilcox ran across the room, hurling himself at a second door. The door splintered open, revealing a dark room containing an impressive collection of electronic equipment. The apartment bedroom had been decorated and outfitted as an EVR recording studio. The windows had been boarded up and opaqued. One end of the room was filled with expensive 3 DVR cameras and microphones. The opposite side of the room consisted of a small open area with a blue screen backdrop that was lit by bright lights. There was blood all over the floor. Finding no one in the room, Wilcox yelled, "Clear!" and returned to the main room. 3 perps were already on their knees, and Harrison was putting handcuffs on the last one. Jessup came out of the bathroom shaking his head and called out, "Sarge, we're too late. There's a dead one in here." Harrison lowered his rifle and followed Jessup into the small bathroom. Jessup pulled back the shower curtain to reveal the naked body of a young girl in the tub. Wilcox looked away in disgust. and gestured for Jessup to follow him back into the tiny apartment living room. Sorting through the mess on the coffee table, he saw an enhanced virtual reality player copier and a stack of newly copied EVR discs. Carefully picking up one of the tiny gold-tinted 1-inch discs, he turned it over and examined it closely. The discs were small, but had the new high-density formats that could hold a petabyte of information, video, audio, and sensory data, on a dozen channels. The recordings captured sight, sound, and even physical sensation. Inserting the disc into the player, he turned the EVR player on. A nearby EVR helmet on the overstuffed chair flashed and whistled as the unit started to play back the information that had been recorded. The heavy headpiece contained dozens of tiny needles that would extend into the surface of the skull of whoever wore it. The EVR rig's electronics interfaced directly with the human nervous system. A digital image on a large monitor nearby echoed the visual channel of the recording that was playing inside the helmet. Wilcox let the disc run just long enough to recognize the girl from the bathroom as she screamed and begged for her life. Hitting the off button, he ejected the disc. "Call the coroner," he instructed Jessup, "and read these animals their rights. Better call in a forensics team, too. They'll want to get fingerprints and other physical evidence before anything's moved." Harrison felt ill. The girl in the tub was younger than his own daughter. As he glanced around at all the electronics, he was amazed at how much tech was crowded into these small rooms. Shaking his head, he tried to imagine how much all of it must have cost. Junkies, he thought. Drug dealers. Where else would they get the money for all this? Then he thought, no, they're probably not addicts or dealers. They're technological entrepreneurs, hackers, geeks. Drugs didn't cause this. This exists because of the market for thrill-kill EVR. The newly rich are the ones that create the demand. Very realistic, very expensive. Give people the ability to live any fantasy they want. What do they create? Murder. Exciting, personal, perverted. The girl was probably slowly killed while wearing a VR transceiver, so her last experiences could be recorded. Studying the gold EVR disc once more, he realized that it would contain recordings from two perspectives, one from the murderer's point of view and the other from that of the victim. Both would have full sensory taps. Rich, depraved degenerates would pay a small fortune for these, even as crude as they were. It took all of his self-control to resist the urge to empty his weapon and destroy everything around him, the equipment, the discs, and the perps. However, he understood that all this evidence would be needed to convict these killers. Therefore, he just stood with his eyes closed as he waited for the backup teams to arrive. Gritting his teeth in silent rage, he heard Harrison finish his obligatory legal litany to the three trembling killers handcuffed on the floor. It was times like this that he hated recent advances in technology. This new tech had created entirely new types of crime. Many people claimed these technological toys could literally make dreams come true. The problem was that it was also true for nightmares. Thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please like and subscribe to Untold Tales on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Now, you know that we love our listeners, fans, and patrons, and we know that you love us too. So I'd like to invite you personally to join the Real Space Insiders community on Patreon. I often get asked, what is Patreon? So Patreon is a membership site that helps support artists and creatives to continue to do the work they love to do, while bringing you the products and services you love. It's what helps pay for my time so that I can focus on collecting, recording, and promoting original science fiction stories of our time. The stories on our podcast are literally being written as we speak and as we are listening. In the Real Space Insiders community on Patreon, you're going to be part of an amazing international community of fans. You'll get exclusive behind-the-scenes content that nobody in the world gets to see. Live narration sessions that I don't post anywhere on social media, or on the internet, or on my website, anywhere. You'll get behind-the-scenes content, digital downloads, early access to content coming out, including events whenever we have them, and patron shout-outs. And you aren't tied into any commitment, so you can stay and go whenever you'd like. So for less than 2 fancy cups of coffee a month, you can keep the stories coming. So go ahead and pop over to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Melissa Del Toro voiceover. That'll be down in the show notes. If you'd like to read more of the stories on the Untold Tales series not narrated here on our podcast, you can find Jeff's books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. So those links are all in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.